So we're up here at lovely sunny Trentham, and we're doing a pond in combination with Stephen from Building All Ways. So here you can see the pond's been really well made. He's got some plant shelves dug in, which is really good for having plants of various sizes and preferences for water depth. And even down the bottom here, he's got quite a deep patch that's going to be great for lilies, and that's going to be a really good spot for us to drop a little aerator to make sure that we're getting good circulation. So the idea with this pond is that that mound that you see behind there, that's actually just been built there while he's constructing it. That will be have a bit more renovation put through it. But you can see here where the steps are, there's going to be a small little waterfall spilling down from the top here, and at the top there's going to be a bog garden, a wetland. And originally when Stephen contacted us, he was planning on building a wetland filter up here, which basically means he would pump water into the wetland filter and it would flow up through the wetland and then trickle back down over the waterfall. But after conversation, we figured out that that wasn't going to be his best option. I'm not a very big fan of that type of filtration. It works, and it works really well, but so does churning your own butter or making your own ice cream. But nowadays there are better things to do and better ways to do that, and it's the same with wetland filters. So while they work, there's just better ways to do it, and more importantly, there's lots easier ways to maintain them, because the issue, and generally the people that build the wetland filters either don't tell you, or they're just more interested in coming back in a few years' time and completely draining the wetland and pulling all the rocks out and giving it a good clean and charging you for it. But they're very, very labour intensive. So wetland filters have their place, but in this situation, Stephen didn't like the idea of having to maintain, having such high maintenance on this project. So he opted to do a different filter, which is the Koi Clear filter, and we'll step you through that in a minute. And what he's going to do now with this is still have his bog garden, but instead of the water flowing up through it and acting as a filter, it's just simply going to flow out of the filter into the bog garden and then trickle down through the waterfall, so that he's got that all in one, but more importantly, can just have it a lot easier to clean the filter. You can see that he's got power right there, right next to the water's edge, and that just makes everything a hell of a lot easier in terms of positioning of equipment, and more importantly, being able to remove the equipment when something goes wrong, or you just need to change it, or the pump reaches the end of its life and you just need to change it over. What you don't want to do is run cables through liner or concrete and make it difficult in removing equipment, because at some point in time, whether it be a day, a year, a month, whatever, it's going to need to come out. So the easier you can make that, the better. All right, so we've had a bit of a walkthrough and shown you a couple of things about the construction. Now let's talk about the equipment that's going to go in there. First of all, you can see here that this is a material which is a pond underlay. It's a fabric material, and you would have seen in the video and possibly in the background that there's sand there. So the reason why Stephen's got both there is that it's common to use sand as a bit of a protective underlay for the liner. This job is going to be using a pond liner. But with pond liner, it's kind of like painting. All the work is in the preparation. The better you have that surface, the better the result you're going to get, the longer your liner is going to last you. And so with sand, it's great for on the bottom, but the problems with sand is that it doesn't have any protection on the walls. And the other problem with sand is that you've got to barrow the bloody crap in and put it in the pond, which drives people insane. Great for Stephen, he's got his own little earth moving equipment and diggers and stuff, so it's easy for him to do. But if you're building a large pond at home, don't use sand, you'll break your back. So this underlay stuff is much, much better. And so Stephen went ahead and organised that after we discussed his lining. We haven't got the liner here to show you, but Stephen's gone with a PVC liner. That's fine to use, a PVC liner. I wish he had gone for EPDM, but he didn't find us until after he got the liner anyway. Nothing wrong with PVC in terms of what Stephen's doing here. The only downsides with PVC is that it has plasticizers in it. So over time, with UV sun exposure, which is critical in Australia, eventually it will break down those plasticizers. So over time it degrades much, much faster than what we prefer to use, which is a rubber EPDM liner, and that will outlive you and I. All right, so you can see there's a variety of equipment that I've got back here, and the reason for that is that when you start running into larger ponds, the advice that you might get online or from your normal sort of retailer that sells bathtub sized ponds is that you want to turn your water over once an hour, or with larger ponds maybe once every 2 hours. And that's true within reason. And I say within reason because what happens is that when you get larger ponds, you need larger pumps, and that means larger expense and larger power consumption, so larger running expenses. The other issue is that most pond filters have an optimal flow through, which means that if you push too much water through it too quickly, the bacteria that runs these filters doesn't have enough contact time to actually process the water well. So what you end up having to do is get a large pump, divert some of the water through the filter and some of the water just back into the pond to recirculate it. So it's not really efficient. So what we do with these sorts of larger ponds is actually go a different direction, and we'll put in the appropriate size pump to suit the filter, but then pick up that extra need for circulation by adding an aeration system. And that means that you're getting oxygen in the water as well as circulating it, giving the bacteria the optimal conditions, and it's a far better way of doing it. And another piece of the pie when it comes to ponds of any size is a UV light. And what a UV light does is that it guarantees clear water. What happens when pond water turns green is it's just single-celled microscopic algae that you can't see unless you're looking at it under a microscope. The reason why the water turns green and you can see the green water is because there is billions of these things. So what happens when you pass the water through a UV light, the UV light penetrates the algae cell and basically implodes it or kills it from the inside. And it's literally a case of green water goes in, clear water comes out. So in a new pond, it means that you're not going to have any green water. In an existing pond where you've got green water, in a matter of days, it should clear it up quite quickly. Now, when you're running a UV light in a brand new pond, the best thing to do is to plumb it all up and get it all ready, but don't actually turn it on for about a month. And the reason for that is the bacteria that lives in the filter, you want that to actually develop and grow and populate the filter before you turn on the UV light, because not only does a UV light nail any single-celled algae, it also nails any disease organisms, including bacteria. So you want good bacteria in your filter, but your UV is going to kill it when it's moving around the water and establishing itself in its filter. So the best thing to do is just leave the UV off for a month. You can speed that up significantly by using a really good nitrifying bacteria, which means that you can actually just populate the filter straight away with the bacteria, and then I'd probably just leave the UV light on for a week or so, off for a week or so, because that will give enough time for the bacteria to actually populate. This is the UV that I was talking about, and what happens with this UV is the water is literally just pumped in one end. Inside there is a UV bulb. Water passes through there and travels out the other side. These UVs from Metala, the new Easy Clear UVs, are really good because even when the hose tail is on, it enables you to spin it around to different directions, which helps with your plumbing. So you get that full 360 and you can position the UV pretty much wherever you want. If you want to mount it to a wall, you can put these clips in and mount it to a wall. So it's quite a good, unique UV. And there's a little viewing indicator lamp there, which means that you can see the UV bulb working and shining to know that it's working. Now, another key aspect with UV lights is that the lights will shine a sort of blue colour, but Metala uses a Philips glow bulb, and the Philips is the best UV bulbs you can get. They have an operating life of about 9,000 hours, which means that it'll last you about a year. Now, what happens with the UV bulb is that after that time, it will still be shining blue, but there's no UV effectiveness. So in effect, you've just got a blue light. So if you're running a UV 24/7, which I'd recommend you do in Australia, then once a year you just need to replace the bulb. Make sure you use a Philips bulb, because the cheap Chinese ones that are out on the market, they last about 3,000 hours at best. They say 3,000 hours, but our Chinese friends like saying something and producing something a little bit different. So you may find that you put a bulb in there and very quickly you're growing algae again and you're wondering what's going on. Don't skimp on the bulbs. All right, moving over to the pump. The pump's the workhorse of the filtration system. So a pump just literally moves water, nothing else. It doesn't do anything in terms of filtration. It just other than puts the water into the filter. So when you buy a small little pond pump and you think it's got a little sponge filter on the front of it and that's all you need, it's a filter. It's not a filter. It's just there to protect the impeller. These pumps from Mesna is what we recommend. They're an exceptionally high quality pump. They're still manufactured in Germany and made in Germany. Some of their competing brands have these fancy stickers with a German flag that says engineered in Germany, global inspiration, engineered in Germany, whatever the language that they use, but basically it means made in China. So you're paying for a German pump, you're getting a Chinese pump, not with Mesna. If it doesn't say made in Germany on the box, it's not made in Germany. So it's important, if you're paying for the really good quality stuff, that you're getting it. And the reason why you want to pay for a real good quality pump is you want it to last, you want it to be low low power consumption, so it doesn't cost you a fortune to run, and the Germans are leagues ahead of anyone else in the world in terms of low power consumption. And again, our Chinese friends will put on certain claims on their boxes, but when you actually plug it into those little neat devices that measures power, guess what? Doesn't do what it says. So the German stuff does. The other key thing with these pumps is that you can see the pump motor itself sits inside this big cage. This cage has about an 8mm square opening. What that means is that any soft solid, so fish crap, rotting plants, vegetation, will actually go in there, won't damage the pump. The pump will spit it out into the filter. So this is as close to a no maintenance pump as you're ever going to get. In this environment, when it's all planted out and the fish that are in there, it's really going to surprise me if Stephen needs to pull this out at all to clean it. Still a good idea to do it every now and then, just maybe even once a year just to clean it, but you'll get leaves that cake all over the top of this, and unless it's really chock-a-block with stuff, you don't have to clean it out very often. The other advantage is that with this filter pump, in a lot of cases it's easier to have the hose coming out the side rather than up the top. That's the hose will connect to and pump water to the filter. What you can do with this is replace this with one that's in the box without the opening, put this one on the side, and you can have the hose running out easier, which means that in shallower sort of setups, you're not having to worry about hose coming up and over. Just another nice little easy thing to do and use. This hose tail can be used with 40mm or 50mm hose. In this case, it's a 13,000 litre an hour pump, so we've recommended 40mm hose. And you can see there that it clicks straight into the hose there. And we use a special hose clamp that's specially designed for this ribbed kind of hose. This is always what you want to use in a pond. It's a special pond hose that's corrugated on the outside but smooth on the inside. Pond pumps aren't like pool pumps, so they don't have a lot of pressure behind them. They move a lot of water but not with much force. So you need to have it smooth and open on the inside, being the right size diameter, because if you have too small a hose, say if you were trying to pass 13,000 litres through 19mm hose, you're not going to get 13,000 litres out of it because the water tries to stick onto the sides, and that's why you also want smooth on the inside, not corrugated on the inside. It's also better to use this than PVC pipe because the same thing happens when you use PVC pipe. If you've got to go around a corner with this hose, you can see you can just bend it easily and go around on a large radius so the flow isn't reduced. When you use PVC hose or PVC pipe, it butts up against a 90-degree bend and it really slows the water down as it tries to get around that corner. So the pond hose is really important to maximise the flow rate coming out of your pump. Now if we move over to the aeration system, and like I said, the aeration system is the icing on the cake in terms of circulation and making sure that the fish and more importantly the bacteria get the oxygen that they need, because the bacteria that drives this filtration process is mostly aerobic, meaning it loves oxygen, so it needs lots of oxygen. Now this little system is that's the little air pump there. This is also done by Metala. Metala is a Taiwanese manufacturer, so very good quality and more importantly very quiet pumps. When it comes to air pumps, you don't want to buy cheap pumps because they make a lot of noise. You'll be sitting out here trying to enjoy a drink and watching your waterfall and listening to the water when all you hear is the hum of the aerator. So don't skimp on the air pump. Get a decent Taiwanese air pump. Japanese also make good quality air pumps, Chinese not so much. So this little air pump, what we're going to have in the pond is 2 of these small disc aerators. There's thousands of little slots or hundreds of little slots in the smaller ones, and the air goes in here. This blows up kind of like a balloon. The slits open up, the pores open up, and millions of bubbles will rise up to the surface. They get larger as they come up and they drag the water from the bottom and constantly circulate the water like that. So it's a good idea to put these in the deeper sections of the pond so that the bubbles have got more depth to rise and get larger and ultimately move more water. And what we do with this is just a simple manifold. So this will connect to the end of the air pump, that will go into there, and into each one of these will go this self-weighted air hose. Another thing that you come up against when you talk aeration systems from pond shops that might have about 2 or 3 pieces of equipment made for a bathtub is that they'll try and suggest that you use basically a fish tank aerator that they say is used, that you should use in a pond. The worst thing you can do is use a fish tank aerator in a pond, because for the hose that they use is only a 4mm diameter. The smallest one that we recommend is a 10mm diameter, and more importantly, the air hose that goes in the fish tanks floats. And if you want a pond that's got spaghetti floating all around and looks ugly and horrible as hell, go ahead and use it. But if you want something that looks better, and you're not seeing anything on the surface other than bubbles, then this is what you want to use. This is a self-weighted PVC air hose, very thick-walled, and you just literally put it in the pond, it sinks down the bottom. It's black. Most pond liners are black. If you've got a concrete pond, paint it black, seal it black, because black gives a bigger depth perception, and also it hides algae. You're always going to get algae in a pond, no matter what. No matter what you put with UV, aeration, filtration, there is always going to be a degree of algae on your pond. It will grow on all of any surface that's underwater. So by having it black, it hides that much, much better. You could do a fluoro pink pond, and in a few years it'd end up just olive green with algae. So black is the colour to use. So this stuff, very easy to hide. And then we just pop this. This is its own waterproof casing, but we like putting this in another protective, just little pump cover, just to make sure that we keep it out of the direct sun, because it's got a thermal overload, which means that if it gets too hot, it's going to switch off and protect itself. Now, we've decided in this system to use a Metala Koi Clear filter. We rate these up to about 20,000 litre ponds, even koi ponds. These things are absolutely exceptional filtration systems and great for large ponds. You can see it's large itself. It's a sizable filter. And that's a key aspect to a large filter. If someone's trying to sell you a small little garbage can type of filter that you dig into the ground, for a big pond, walk away, because you will pay a fortune for it and it just won't do the job. The bigger the pond, the bigger the filter. You can't get around that. It's just common sense. Filtration media from Metala. This is basically the very first product that Metala manufactured 20, 30 odd years ago. And it was manufactured for the aquaculture industry. And what's unique about it is that it's got all this weird noodle-like matrix that allows water to pass through, but stops the particles getting through. So it's got that great combination of particle trapping, but still not clogging like, say, a foam filter will. Again, in a large pond, don't use foam. Foam clogs up and it will drive you insane, especially if you've got a koi pond. Don't use foam, because the large koi crap will clog up foams and you'll be cleaning it out all the time. So this has the great combination of catching the particle but allowing the water to flow through. And one of the ways that it does that is that because of that weird noodle-like matrix, 2-minute noodle-like matrix, the water just doesn't pass through. What happens is the water's got to travel and divert and go in different areas. So as the water passes through, it slows down its flow path and enables the solids that are in there to settle out and drop out of suspension. So it's one of the key unique things with Metala. Another thing about Metala, that's from the mechanical aspect. From the biological aspect, there is so much surface area on here, and surface area is very important with biological filtration, because the bacteria that does this job, it basically just needs somewhere to live. So any pond filter is literally just a house for bacteria, nothing else. So by having the optimal flow through, getting the right amount of water going through, removing the solids, the bacteria's got a good place to live. When you look at this weird noodle stuff under the microscope, it's porous. So it's just got enormous surface area for bacteria to live on, and that's why for what is relatively a small filter compared to other ones, these can do really large ponds. They can be run like this, standing up out of the ground. When you do that though, you want to make sure that you use either the Koi Clear stand that it drops into it, or you build your own. And the reason for that is that this is quite a strong, sturdy unit, but it's still ultimately made of what is a very thick plastic. But just like any plastic, if this was standing up in full sun, it would get a bit malleable. And when you've got essentially almost a ton of water in there, it means that it may over time warp and it might topple over. So you want to make sure that you stand it up if you're using it in an upright position. Now in this particular application, Stephen's going to dig this into the ground, and because what happens with this filter is it's an upflowing filter. So the water goes in at the bottom, flows up through the filter media, and then goes out back into the pond. So he's going to dig this down to probably about here, which is going to stabilise the filter, hide the filter behind the rocks. He's going to have a 100mm pipe coming out of here, and that's going to be the start of his wetland filter, which will then spill down into the waterfall. So although it's a big, massive filter, it's actually quite easy to hide in the landscape. In terms of where he's going to position the equipment in the pond, because the filter's up that end and the water's going to be coming down here, what you want is the pump at the opposite end. because you don't want to have the pump right at the same point where the water is going to be flowing in, because otherwise you're just circulating that small part of water. Nothing much is happening up here. So the water's re-entering here, so the pump should go right up the other end, where that's going to circulate better. And that's good as well, because that's where the power point is, so that makes it easy. The aerator would go up there where the power point is. Well, the aerator can go anywhere, because the length of hose that you're running into the pond can be any length. So it doesn't really matter if the aerator was right over there or right over there. You'd just run air hose to get back into the pond. We'd have one aerator down here in the deeper section to make sure that that's getting circulated really well. And probably because they're going to have the waterfall there, I'm not sure what the flow, well actually I know what the flow is, it's going to be 13,000, so it's going to be a decent flow going down through there. So you'd probably just even have another aerator here, or maybe up there. The second one's neither here nor there, you could, because the depths are going to be somewhat similar, but the main thing is that you just get one down there. The UV would also, in this case, because the power's there, what you would do is have the UV there, and you would pump straight from the pump into the UV, and then your 40mm hose will travel around to the back of the filter and then in. If you had power up there, you'd probably put the UV up there, but in this case, we'll just put it over there because that's where the power is, so just keep it simple. All right, so as you can see, it's no longer a hole. It's a pond that's starting to take shape. Because he's got a lot of river rock in there, a lot of gravel, they never come washed, and if they do get washed, they don't do a great job of it. So it's not uncommon for the water to start out like this. I've just brought up some flocculant, which is a product that will clear the mud out of that quite quickly, so that's not going to be too much of a concern. Over here he's just put he's done his own skimmer with a little housing, and that's where he's positioned the pond pump. Inside that little box there is the little aeration pump, and you can see the aerator bubbling away over there. He's just going to adjust that so that the bubbles are somewhat even, and he's got a couple of ventilation holes, a few ventilation holes in the back of that wooden box. In that wooden box, he's done a really good job of this one. That's where the UV is, very close to the power, very close to everything else, but completely out of sight. That looks great. What else have we got over here? You can see his waterfall that he's done. The liner still needs to be trimmed off and put back into place. He's doing a bit of plumbing works over there. Looks like he's putting in an auto top-up. And over here, so the filter is stuck kind of off to the side, whereas when we were first talking, we were thinking he was going to put it at the back, but you can see just how easy it is to hide that filter. So that was the big 1 metre tall, 1 metre wide diameter, and it just sits in quite nicely there now, and he'll just do some landscaping around there and hide that quite easily. Then he's got his outlet there, that'll be planted into a little bit of a wetland and just have the water flow through and go back down over there. So next thing is to get the water clear and get some plants in there.